My fiancé acted like I was garbage for weeks, then told me to find someone better if I didn't like it. She didn't expect I'd actually do it and have a more beautiful girl within days. I thought I was in what most people would consider a normal relationship. You know the kind. Nothing particularly fancy or dramatic. Just two adults sharing life together, splitting bills and enjoying the occasional frozen pizza on a lazy weekend. It seems straightforward enough, the kind of partnership that develops naturally when two people decide they want to build something together. But somewhere along the way, something fundamental shifted in our dynamic. She gradually stopped treating me like an actual partner and started acting as though I was merely background noise in her own life. At first, I tried to convince myself it was temporary, that maybe she was just going through a rough patch or dealing with stress I didn't fully understand. I kept my head down, focused on my own responsibilities, and figured this was just one of those phases that all relationships go through eventually. Then, slowly but surely, she just stopped showing up emotionally. Same physical presence, same face, same voice. But the way she looked at me and interacted with me became completely different. It was like she had gotten bored with our entire relationship and simply forgot to mention it to me. The shift wasn't sudden or dramatic. It was gradual enough that I kept making excuses for it and convincing myself that things would return to normal eventually. She waited for me to notice her efforts, then said, "I thought maybe we could have a normal dinner together," while pointing at two plates she had set up on the kitchen table. I glanced over at what she had prepared. "Microwave lasagna," I observed. "Are you trying to win points this late in the game?" I asked directly. She sighed heavily. "I'm trying to show you that I still care about us. You didn't care when I was fixing the washing machine and paying all the bills," I pointed out. "You only care now that someone else is moving in." "Because it's weird, Tyler. You're moving in some girl you barely know," she said defensively. "She's not replacing you in a relationship. She's replacing you as a roommate," I clarified. "There's a significant difference." Jessica shook her head, clearly frustrated. "You think I'm just going to walk away like none of this meant anything?" "It meant something until you acted like I didn't," I replied simply. She didn't have a response to that, so I went into my room and closed the door. A few minutes later, I heard her slam the bathroom door with enough force to rattle the walls. First, it started with her tuning out halfway through conversations that we were supposed to be having together. I would mention something that happened at work, some story about a coworker or a project I was dealing with, and she would barely manage to fake interest before immediately going back to scrolling through her phone. It wasn't malicious or deliberately cruel, but it was clear that I simply wasn't important enough for her to bother hiding her disinterest anymore. That weekend, Sophia sent me a text asking if I would be around for her to drop off more of her belongings. I told her to come by Sunday afternoon, which worked out perfectly since Jessica was out for most of the day anyway. Probably at Chloe's place trying to rewrite the entire story to gain sympathy and make herself look like the victim in this situation. Sophia showed up right on time with a small piece of luggage and another storage bin. I let her into the apartment. She gave me a quick nod of acknowledgement and got straight to work moving everything into the spare room without making any unnecessary noise or fuss. She paused only once during this process to ask, "She's still here?" "Yep," I confirmed. "Should I brace for impact?" she asked with a slight grin. I couldn't help but smirk at her question. "She's been pretty quiet lately. She's trying the nice girl act now." "Bold strategy," Sophia replied with obvious amusement. About 30 minutes later, Jessica came home from wherever she had been spending her day. I heard the front door open, the sound of keys being dropped on the counter, and then her footsteps suddenly stopped. She had clearly spotted Sophia standing by the hallway, holding a few hangers and obviously in the middle of moving her things in. There was this incredibly weird silence that lasted long enough to become genuinely awkward for everyone involved. Then Jessica crossed her arms and decided to directly confront Sophia. "You don't feel weird being part of this?" she asked. Sophia tilted her head slightly, genuinely confused. "Part of what?" "This whole situation. Moving into a place where you're clearly not welcome," Jessica said, as if Sophia was somehow violating some unspoken rule. Then came the sighs. "You know exactly the kind I'm talking about. Those long, dramatic, exaggerated exhales that people make when they want you to know that your very existence is somehow burdensome. Like the simple act of lifting her eyes off her phone screen to acknowledge my presence required genuine physical effort that she resented having to expend. I would ask her to handle something completely reasonable and simple, like picking up groceries on her way home or remembering to feed our fish, and she would react as though I had just asked her to dig a trench in our backyard. Sophia looked around the apartment, then at me, then back at Jessica with perfect composure. "I don't live with you. I'm moving into Tyler's apartment. You just happen to still be here temporarily. Jessica stepped forward, clearly getting more agitated. You know nothing about us or what we've been through. That's completely true, Sophia agreed matter-of-factly. And I don't care about us because there is no us anymore. I care that rent gets paid on time and the bathroom stays clean. That's about it. That response completely shut Jessica up, because there really wasn't anything she could say to counter such straightforward logic. Sophia went back to organizing her room, and Jessica turned her attention to me instead. Wow, really classy choice, she said sarcastically. You wanted someone who wouldn't ask you to participate in basic life responsibilities, I replied calmly. Now you're getting exactly what you wanted. Don't get upset just because someone else is better at handling adult situations than you are. You're just bitter, she accused. No, I'm focused on moving forward with my life, I corrected her. She stormed off again, and this time she slammed her bedroom door harder than usual. Something in the apartment actually shook from the impact. I didn't even flinch at the dramatic display. A couple of hours later, I received a phone call from Dylan. You're not going to like this, he said as soon as I picked up. I'm not someone who nags or repeats himself constantly when asking for things. If I ask someone to do something and they choose to blow it off, that's fine. That's their choice to make. But patterns tell you everything you need to know about a person's priorities and how they view you, and her patterns were absolutely screaming, I don't care about you or this relationship anymore. I already don't like it. What happened? I asked. Chloe posted a thread in her private group chat. She's claiming that you emotionally manipulated Jessica, kicked her out so you could live with your side piece, and that you're being financially abusive, Dylan explained. I had to pause for a moment. Financially abusive? How exactly? She said you controlled all the bills, the lease, and access to the apartment, and that you're using your financial position to punish her emotionally, he continued. I actually laughed out loud at this characterization. She lived here completely rent-free. She never once paid her half of any bill. If anything, I financially spoiled her for months. Dylan immediately agreed. I know that, and everyone else who actually knows you knows that too. She's just throwing accusations at the wall now, hoping something will stick. Let her try, I said confidently. Nothing sticks when you've got receipts for everything. And I absolutely did have receipts. I had saved every single rent payment, every utility bill, every grocery order that I had paid for during our entire relationship. If Jessica wanted to play the game of making false accusations about financial abuse, I was completely ready to present documented evidence of exactly who had been supporting whom. By the 10th day of Jessica's 2-week notice period, she had completely stopped trying to win me over with fake gestures of affection and consideration. Instead, she started pretending like she was some innocent tenant caught in a hostile lease dispute that was completely beyond her control. She walked around quietly, stayed in her room for longer periods, and actually cleaned up after herself for once in her life. If I didn't know better, I would have said she was trying to rebrand herself as the reasonable, mature person in this situation. She didn't say much to me during this period, and I didn't bother asking her about her plans or her feelings. I had my mind focused entirely on the finish line. Just 4 more days to go. As a result of this growing tension, I started staying out of the apartment more frequently. I would hit the gym for longer sessions, deliberately take the scenic route home to delay my arrival, or grab burgers and hang out with my best friend Dylan, who's also 26. Being at home started to feel like being in timeout for some crime I hadn't committed, and the most frustrating part was that she didn't seem to notice my absence or care about it in the slightest. I had already cleared everything with the landlord, scheduled the lock change for the morning after she moved out, and arranged for the keys to be swapped as soon as she was officially gone. All I had to do was sit tight and avoid letting her bait me into any unnecessary drama or arguments. Then something genuinely weird happened that I hadn't expected. Sophia and I were eating in the kitchen one evening. Nothing formal or planned, we just happened to be grabbing food at the same time. She casually mentioned something about one of her friends who works at that overpriced rooftop bar downtown, the one with the long waiting lists and pretentious cocktail menu. When she mentioned the name of the place, I immediately remembered that Jessica had been there a few weeks back. I remembered it specifically because she came home that night wearing heels, clearly buzzed from drinking, and tossed her jacket on the floor like she was allergic to using hangers. That incident had happened about 3 weeks before our final breakup conversation. At the time, I didn't think much of it beyond being annoyed that she left her clothes scattered around. But something about Sophia's casual mention of the place made me curious. I asked her casually, "Which place exactly?" She told me the name, and I raised an eyebrow. It was definitely the same spot that Jessica had been bragging about for days leading up to that particular night out. She had mentioned that Chloe knew someone who could get them in without having to wait in the usual line. "Why do you ask?" Sophia asked, clearly noticing the change in my expression. I shrugged, trying to keep it casual. Jessica and Chloe were there a while back. She came home acting different that night. Different how? Sophia pressed. I took a second to think about how to describe it. She was weirdly nice the next day, almost artificially so. She didn't even insult my taste in TV shows, which is definitely not normal behavior for her. Sophia smiled a little at this description, but didn't push the conversation any further. Then one Tuesday afternoon, Dylan called me asking if I could help him move this incredibly clunky old dresser into a storage unit. While we were standing there trying to figure out the logistics of how to wedge this massive piece of furniture down a narrow stairwell without completely destroying the banister in the process, his friend Sophia showed up unexpectedly. She had brought some extra moving straps or something similar that she thought might help with the situation. Later that night, something clicked in my mind and I started remembering more details from that evening. I recalled that Jessica had left her Uber app open on the kitchen counter while charging her phone the day after that night out. I wasn't deliberately snooping through her phone or anything like that. It was just sitting right there in plain view while she was charging it. She had apparently forgotten to close the Uber app, and I happened to glance at it when I walked by. I could see the trip history was still pulled up on the screen, and I noticed that the drop-off location was listed as 9th and Jefferson Street. That definitely wasn't our apartment. Our place was nowhere near that intersection. At the time, I didn't think much of this discrepancy. I figured maybe she had shared a ride with someone and walked the rest of the way home, or maybe she had stopped somewhere else before coming back to our place. But now, with what Sophia had mentioned about her friend at that rooftop spot, it started scratching at something in the back of my mind. I decided to pull up my old text messages from that night to check the timeline. I had sent Jessica a message asking when she was planning to head home, and she had replied at 11:47 p.m. with, "Already back, just changing. Be home soon." But that timeline didn't match what I actually remembered happening at all. I had been asleep by 1 a.m., and she definitely hadn't come through the door until sometime after that. So either my memory was completely wrong, or she had lied about when she was actually coming home and where she was when she sent that message. I decided to run a little test to see if my suspicions had any merit. The next day, while Jessica was out of the apartment, I casually asked Sophia if her friend at that rooftop spot still worked there. She confirmed that yes, her friend still bartended there, Thursday through Saturday nights. "Why do you ask?" Sophia wanted to know. "You think she'd recognize someone if I showed her a picture?" I asked. Sophia gave me a long, knowing look. "Are you checking up on something specific?" Right from the moment she arrived, Sophia was incredibly easy to talk to. She had this chill, relaxed energy about her. And she was sarcastic in that genuinely funny way, rather than the bitter, cutting way that Jessica had developed. It was refreshing to interact with someone who seemed to actually enjoy conversation rather than treating it like a chore. "Just following a hunch," I admitted. I sent Sophia a cropped photo of Jessica and Chloe from one of their typical fake influencer-style posts that they were always taking together. A couple of hours later, Sophia followed up with some very interesting information. "Yep, she definitely remembers them," Sophia reported. She said Jessica was all over some guy for most of the night. "Definitely wasn't you." She described him as a short dude with a beanie. They left together around closing time, and that was the last she saw of them. There it was. No dramatic social media confession, no tearful admission, just solid, reliable intel from someone who didn't know me personally and had no reason to lie or exaggerate. That's exactly how I prefer my evidence. Quiet, clean, and undeniable. That night, I didn't say a single word about what I had discovered. I just sat in the living room acting like nothing had changed, watching TV and going about my normal evening routine. Jessica walked past me twice during the evening, and the second time she slowed down and commented, "You're really quiet lately." I looked up at her calmly. "What's left to talk about?" She shrugged, clearly fishing for some kind of reaction. "Just saying it feels weird in here." I let her sit with that uncomfortable feeling and went back to watching my show. The next day, I printed out the lease transfer approval forms and put them in a folder along with the updated key swap documentation. I deliberately left the folder on the kitchen counter, where she would definitely see it, letting her absorb the reality that this was actually happening. She did notice it, and that evening she knocked on my bedroom door. "You free to talk?" she asked. After we successfully managed to get the dresser moved without any major disasters, we decided to grab some Chinese food together. We ended up sitting across from each other at one of those small tables, and I found myself having the kind of genuine conversation I hadn't experienced in months. During our meal, I discovered that Sophia was actively looking for a place to live. She was temporarily crashing with her cousin while apartment hunting, trying to avoid getting stuck with some weird Craigslist roommate who might turn out to be completely insane. Not really, I replied. I just want to have a conversation about all of this, she pressed. I opened the door halfway, not inviting her in but acknowledging her request. She leaned against the doorframe, trying to look casual and approachable. Are you absolutely sure about all of this? She asked. I nodded without hesitation. Completely sure. You don't want to talk things through before I leave? She tried again. Talk about what specifically? The fact that you're leaving? I asked. About what actually happened between us. About how we got to this point, she said. You mean like how you checked out of our relationship, treated me like furniture, and then disappeared with some guy in a beanie? I said directly. Her facial expression cracked for just half a second. That moment when someone realizes they've been caught but hasn't figured out how to respond yet. We talked the entire time we were eating. Actual, substantial conversation where both people were engaged and interested. I wasn't trying to impress her or be artificially funny or anything like that. I was just talking naturally. She asked thoughtful questions. She actually listened to my responses. And she even laughed genuinely a couple of times at things I said. When I casually mentioned that I had a girlfriend, she simply said, "Hope she treats you right," and left it at that. You've been asking me to talk, so let's talk, I continued. Who is he? I don't know what you're talking about, she said defensively. The rooftop bar. Your supposed girls' night. You didn't come home until after 1 a.m., but you told me you were already back around midnight. Why lie about something so simple? I laid out the facts calmly. Jessica straightened up, immediately shifting into defensive mode. You're spying on me now? No, I just remember things. Your stories never added up, and now I know why, I replied. I decided to push a little further. Was it worth it? Her eyes dropped to the floor, and for a moment the fake confusion disappeared. It was just one night. I didn't think it would matter in the long run. So you did cheat, I stated matter-of-factly. It wasn't serious or emotional. Don't be so dramatic, she said. But then she nodded once, quietly. But yes, it happened. Cool. Now I know for certain, I said calmly. That simple comment stuck with me in a way I hadn't expected. Because honestly, I couldn't remember the last time Jessica had even bothered to ask how my day went, let alone shown any concern for my general well-being. When I got home that evening, I found Jessica curled up on the couch in her usual position, completely absorbed in whatever show she was binge-watching. She didn't even acknowledge that I had walked through the door, just immediately said, "Can you not walk so loud? I'm watching this." Without even looking in my direction, she looked up at me with surprise. You're not even angry about it? No, I'm actually relieved, I told her honestly. You just confirmed that I made the right decision. She stood there looking like she didn't know what to say next, probably expecting me to yell or get emotional or beg for details. Instead, I simply closed the door and went back to what I was doing. Later that evening, Sophia walked by my room and handed me a sticky note with a grin on her face. She packed an entire box completely wrong. Breakables at the bottom, books stacked on top. Zero survival instinct. I couldn't help but laugh. That explains a lot about her decision-making process. The closer Jessica's move-out date approached, the more she tried to pretend that everything between us was completely normal and functional. She started using overly polite phrases like, "Excuse me," and "Do you want anything from the store?" As if basic manners could somehow repair months of dismissive and cold behavior. I wasn't interested in engaging with this fake politeness. I had moved well beyond caring about surface-level courtesy, especially when it was clearly a manipulative tactic rather than genuine change. I had a specific plan in mind now. The confession about her cheating was already there, documented in my memory, but I wanted something more concrete. Something in her own voice that I could hold on to if she tried to spin the story differently after she was gone. This wasn't about creating drama or getting revenge in some petty way. I wanted leverage, something solid I could use if she decided to rewrite history once she was safely out of my apartment. So I decided to make it easy for her to talk. I stopped actively avoiding her around the apartment, left my bedroom door open when I was working on my laptop, and moved around the living space without keeping deliberate distance between us. I wasn't being petty or giving her the cold shoulder anymore. I was just acting normal and unfazed by anything that had happened. That kind of calm indifference always gets under people's skin much more effectively than yelling or arguing ever could. Jessica picked up on this shift in my behavior very quickly. The tension from her side began to change noticeably. She started being nicer to me, offering to share leftovers when she ordered food, and asking about my day in that awkward, performative way people use when they're testing whether there's still an opening for reconciliation. Spoiler alert, It definitely wasn't just a phase. The contrast hit me differently after spending a few hours talking to someone who treated basic human interaction as normal rather than annoying. Not someone who was trying to blow smoke or manipulate the situation, just someone who wasn't visibly annoyed by my mere existence in the same space as them. Every time she tried one of these conversational overtures, I gave her a neutral yes or no response. That was all she got from me. Basic acknowledgement without any emotional investment. On day 12 of her 2-week notice period, she finally worked up the courage to ask if we could clear the air between us. I told her sure, which clearly surprised her. The next night, I mentioned that I would be home early and we could have that conversation before she finished packing up her remaining belongings. She looked genuinely surprised that I had agreed to talk, but she smiled like she thought she was finally getting somewhere meaningful with me. She definitely wasn't getting anywhere, but I was happy to let her think otherwise. That evening, I made sure everything was prepared exactly how I wanted it. I put my phone on airplane mode and installed a voice recorder app, adjusting the microphone sensitivity to high quality. I wasn't worried about the legal implications of recording our conversation. We lived in a one-party consent state, which meant I could legally record any conversation I was part of without informing the other person. Honestly, even if I never ended up using the recording for anything, just having it would give me peace of mind and a sense of control over the narrative. I set up the living room to look casual and non-threatening. I dimmed the main lights, turned on one table lamp, and left one chair open across from where I planned to sit. No background music, no distractions, just quiet space for conversation. Jessica emerged from her room dressed like she was trying to look composed and put together, but also approachable. Whatever that combination was supposed to communicate. I nodded toward the chair across from me, and she sat down, exhaling like this was the first genuine conversation we had attempted in months. I didn't lead the conversation or prompt her with questions. I just let her start talking and fill the uncomfortable silence however she wanted to. She went straight into what she clearly thought would be effective, using a soft, vulnerable tone and taking vague ownership of some unspecified mistakes. She threw around phrases like, "I just wasn't in a good place," and talked about how we had communication issues that were somehow mutual problems rather than specific behaviors. I stayed quiet throughout this whole speech, just nodding when it seemed appropriate to acknowledge what she was saying. She talked extensively about how she didn't feel seen or appreciated in our relationship, and how we had fundamental compatibility problems. All the usual breakup script material that sounded like she had memorized it from some online forum full of people who never actually take real accountability for their actions. Eventually, she started circling around that night at the rooftop bar, the one that had gotten her caught in her lie. She danced around the details at first, saying it was a confusing time in her life and that she had made mistakes she didn't know how to explain at the time. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I found myself thinking, why am I still doing this? Why am I choosing to stay in a situation where I'm clearly not wanted or valued? I didn't immediately jump into any dramatic, "we need to talk" conversations because that's honestly just not my style, and I knew it wouldn't lead anywhere productive. She avoided using specific names or dates, just employing vague phrases designed to soften the edges of what had actually happened. I let her keep talking without interrupting or asking for clarification. After a long pause where she seemed to be gathering courage, she admitted that she had crossed a line one night, but emphasized that it wasn't emotional and didn't mean anything significant to her. That was the moment I shifted slightly in my seat. Not to react dramatically, just enough that she would notice I was paying closer attention. She picked up on my subtle movement and doubled down on her explanation. She said she regretted what had happened, that she knew it would hurt me if I found out, but at the time she felt like our relationship was already over anyway. The words came easily to her, like she had justified this sequence of events to herself so many times that it no longer sounded morally questionable when she said it out loud. She wasn't confessing out of genuine remorse. She was rebranding her actions to make them sound more understandable and less harmful. She didn't realize that she was giving me exactly what I needed. Her own voice, in her own words, admitting to everything I suspected. I let her finish her entire explanation without asking questions, making accusations, or challenging her version of events. When she finally ran out of things to say, she asked if I had anything I wanted to say in response. I simply said, "No, you already said everything I needed to hear." She looked confused and slightly disappointed. "That's it?" I nodded calmly. She lingered for a moment like she was waiting for a fight, or a hug, or some other emotional response that would give her a sense of how I was processing what she had told me. I gave her none of those things. After a few seconds of uncomfortable silence, she got up and went back to her room. I stayed in the living room, replayed the recording to make sure the audio quality was clear, and trimmed it down to just the essential parts: her words, her timeline, her justification for cheating, all captured in her own voice. I wasn't planning to wave this recording in her face or use it to humiliate her publicly. This wasn't about her knowing what I had. It was about me having the definitive last word without actually saying anything. Instead, I just mentally checked out of the relationship. I started keeping to myself more intentionally, stopped pushing for conversations that she clearly didn't want to have, didn't bother arguing about things that weren't worth the energy, and stopped offering to make plans that she would just shoot down anyway. If she wanted to treat me like a roommate rather than a partner, then fine. I could become the quiet, uninvolved roommate she apparently preferred. The next morning, I saved the audio file to a flash drive and made a backup copy on my laptop. I didn't need to use it immediately, but I had a feeling it would become useful very soon. I forwarded the move-out confirmation to the landlord, scheduled the final inspection of the apartment, and picked up the spare key change form from the property management office. Everything was handled cleanly and efficiently. No delays, no unnecessary chaos. Just professional administrative work getting completed on schedule. Jessica didn't say much to me for the rest of that day. I think she could sense that something fundamental had shifted in our dynamic, though she probably couldn't pinpoint exactly what had changed. The energy between us wasn't awkward anymore. It was simply final. I packed up her old towels that were still scattered around the bathroom and set them outside her bedroom door in a cardboard box. I taped a brief note to the container that read, "Take your time. You've got one more night." She didn't respond to the gesture and didn't knock on my door to discuss it, but I could hear her moving around and packing until almost 3 a.m., clearly trying to get everything organized for her departure. Jessica left on a Thursday morning. She didn't even bother saying goodbye or acknowledging that this chapter of our lives was officially closing. She just slipped out quietly around mid-morning, sometime after I'd left for work. I had strategically left a spare key envelope on the kitchen counter labeled "Return Only," and when I came home that evening, the key was there, and she was gone. That was it. The door was locked, the curtains were open, and there was nothing of hers remaining inside the apartment except for a half-used bottle of shampoo in the bathroom and a pair of socks that had gotten jammed behind the dresser. I tossed both items directly in the trash without any sentimentality. I wasn't particularly interested in closure or having some final emotional conversation. What I wanted was a completely clean slate and the opportunity to implement some very carefully calculated consequences for her behavior. You see, I didn't record Jessica's confession just for my own entertainment or satisfaction. I didn't plan this entire sequence of events like it was some revenge fantasy from a movie. I planned it methodically, like it was a professional project. Boring, systematic, effective, and absolutely undeniable. No emotional rants, no social media sob stories, just real damage delivered precisely where it would count the most. I also started saving money more aggressively during this period. I wasn't entirely sure whether I was planning to move out myself or just buying time to figure out what my next move should be. But something fundamental was definitely changing in how I viewed our situation. The first step in my plan involved leveraging something that Jessica cared deeply about: her public image and professional reputation. Jessica was an active participant in a leadership mentorship program that was directly tied to her graduate school program. She would constantly talk about this program like it was practically a second job, going on and on about women in leadership, integrity in action, workplace ethics, and professional development. Her entire personal brand revolved around being perceived as a strong, loyal, ethical woman who was paving the way for other women in her field. She posted about it constantly on social media, attended networking events related to the program, and used her participation as a major talking point in job interviews and professional conversations. The problem was, she wasn't actually any of those things, and now I had her own voice confirming that fact. I waited exactly 3 days after she moved out, then composed a professional email. I didn't send it directly to the program's director because that would have seemed personal and vindictive. Instead, I sent it to the compliance contact that they listed publicly for reporting issues involving ethics violations or conduct problems. The email was short, professional, and completely clean. "Hi, I'm contacting you regarding one of your current participants, Jessica, last name. I've attached a time-stamped audio file containing an admission of dishonest conduct that may be relevant to your program's stated code of conduct and ethics requirements. I'm not seeking any further involvement in this matter, just ensuring that this information reaches the appropriate hands for review. Respectfully, Tyler." Attached to the email was the trimmed audio recording. Jessica's own voice clearly admitting that she had cheated on me, hidden it from me, and lied about her whereabouts and activities while still actively representing herself as a leader in this ethics-focused program. Did I feel guilty about this? Absolutely not. Jessica had built her entire professional life around being seen as morally superior and ethically perfect. That's what she marketed to employers, to her graduate program, and to her professional network. She had been playing fake for months, so I simply provided the real version of who she actually was. Within 48 hours, I received a reply from the compliance office. "Thank you for bringing this matter to our attention. We are reviewing the information you provided internally and will follow up as necessary according to our established protocols." Translation: Jessica's participation in the program was done, and her professional reputation had just taken a significant hit. The second wave of consequences came next, and this one was more focused on her social circle. Jessica had been spinning a particular narrative for months, even before our official breakup occurred. She had been painting me as emotionally unavailable, claiming that I was stifling her personal growth or that I was cold and unsupportive. Then came the washing machine situation, which ended up being the final straw that broke everything wide open. Our washing machine had broken down yet again. This was becoming a frustratingly regular occurrence in our apartment. And guess who had been the one to deal with it during the last 3 separate incidents when this exact same problem had happened? Yeah, that would be me. Every single time. She had been using this characterization to justify the emotional distance in our relationship to her friends, and probably to that guy she had cheated with as well. So I decided to drop the actual truth directly into the friend group dynamic. I didn't contact all of her friends, just the ones who had clearly picked sides after she moved out, or who had asked me questions about what had really happened. I sent a single, straightforward message to the old group chat that we used to use for making plans. I know there's been some mixed information going around, so I want to keep the record clear. She admitted to cheating on me. I have the audio recording of her confession. She was still texting me about fixing our relationship while she was secretly messing around with someone else. You all can believe whatever version you want to believe. I'm just keeping things honest. Then I immediately muted the group chat and never replied to any responses or follow-up questions. I didn't wait around for reactions, didn't provide additional explanations, and didn't defend myself further. That kind of message doesn't need commentary or elaboration. It just lands and speaks for itself. Sophia told me later that Jessica had completely freaked out when the truth came to light. Apparently, Chloe had messaged Jessica directly asking if the cheating allegations were actually true, and instead of flat-out denying what had happened, Jessica tried to pull the "that's not the full context" defense. That's the exact moment when Jessica knew she had lost control of the narrative and the support of her friend group. Chloe immediately distanced herself from Jessica after that conversation. Dylan stopped responding to any of Jessica's check-in messages or attempts to get his perspective on the situation. A couple of other people in our extended social circle quietly unfollowed her on social media. These were quiet exits, the kind that hit much harder than dramatic confrontations because they signal that people have simply written you off as not worth their time anymore. Now, here's the part that I didn't expect to work out quite so perfectly. It turns out that Jessica had been chatting up some guy she had met through one of Chloe's mutual friends. Some clean slate rebound situation with a guy who didn't know anything about her history or recent behavior. Apparently, she had been texting with this guy for weeks before she even moved out of our apartment, lining him up as a backup plan while she was still apologizing to me and trying to convince me to give our relationship another chance. She had been strategically positioning him as a fallback option, probably hoping to pivot to dating him publicly once she had successfully moved out and rewritten the story of our breakup. I didn't even have to actively expose this situation to anyone. Dylan happened to run into this guy at a game night that some mutual friends were hosting, and the guy completely unprompted mentioned that he was kind of seeing Jessica. He told Dylan, "We've been talking for a while. She just got out of something messy with her ex." Dylan, being Dylan, responded with completely honest directness. "Did she tell you that she cheated on her ex and then tried crawling back to him after she got caught?" Because that happened, and it's on record. That was literally all it took. Dylan didn't even bother texting me about this conversation until later that evening, when he casually mentioned, "Think I accidentally ruined Jessica's rebound situation tonight? Sorry, not sorry." So this time around, I decided to ask Jessica if she could be the one to contact our landlord and handle the situation for once. I approached it casually, not making it into some big dramatic request, just asking if she could take point on texting the landlord about getting it fixed since I had handled it multiple times before. Her response was to look up from her phone with this expression of genuine annoyance and say, "Why is this my job?" By the weekend, I received a long, desperate paragraph from Jessica via text message. It started with, "I know you're angry with me, but this is going too far." Then it shifted into, "You're actively ruining my chances at rebuilding my life. I never intentionally hurt you the way you're hurting me now." And it concluded with, "Please stop doing this. You've made your point." I didn't reply to her message. 3 days later, Jessica tried to file some kind of harassment complaint with my landlord, claiming I was creating a hostile living environment and interfering with her life after she had moved out. This attempt didn't get very far at all. I had comprehensive documentation, the lease records showing she was never an official tenant, the voice recording of her confession, her written acknowledgement of the 2-week notice I had given her, and proof that she had no legal rights to the apartment anymore. The landlord called me directly and literally said, "You're completely in the clear legally." But what exactly did she think would happen with a complaint like this? Jessica was clearly grasping at straws, becoming desperate and feeling cornered by the consequences of her own actions. That same day, I received a message from someone in her leadership program. A guy I barely knew who simply said, "Yo, I heard what happened with Jessica." Cold approach, but clean execution. Respect. That's when I knew for certain that her professional reputation was completely destroyed. I didn't celebrate any of these developments. I didn't throw some kind of victory party or post about it on social media. I just went for a long walk around the neighborhood, came home, ordered some wings for dinner, and watched the final episodes of a show I had been neglecting during all the relationship drama. It was over. No dramatic explosion, no revenge social media posts, just Jessica sitting alone in her new apartment with fewer friends, no promising job prospects, no fake advocacy image to maintain, and no one left in her life who was willing to listen to her lies. And me? I was still living in my same apartment, still maintaining my same calm demeanor, still moving forward with my life and still winning. I replied calmly, "Because you live here too." I paused for a moment, then added, "Unless that somehow changed and nobody told me." It seemed like a reasonable point. We were both tenants in this apartment. We both used the washing machine, so it made sense that we would both occasionally handle maintenance issues that came up. I figured I had seen the last of Jessica after the desperate text messages, the failed harassment complaint, her lies getting systematically exposed, the leadership program quietly removing her, and her rebound guy ghosting her like she was contagious. I assumed Jessica would finally disappear into embarrassment and spend some time quietly licking her wounds in private. But that assumption would have required Jessica to possess some degree of self-awareness, which she clearly didn't. Instead, 3 weeks after she had officially moved out of my apartment, I got a knock at my front door. Not a text message, not a phone call, but a full-on surprise visit that I definitely wasn't expecting. I opened the door, half expecting it to be an Amazon delivery or something equally mundane. Instead, it was Jessica standing there like absolutely nothing significant had happened between us. She was dressed up with her makeup carefully done, like she was trying to convince either the world or herself that she still had some measure of control over this situation. Her smile looked like it had been physically stapled to her face. "You didn't answer my texts," she said, trying to sound calm and reasonable, but her voice cracked halfway through the sentence. "Yeah," I said simply. That was kind of the point. She clearly didn't like that response. Jessica brushed past me without asking for permission or waiting for an invitation, stepping directly into the living room like she still had some kind of ownership rights to the space. I didn't even bother trying to stop her physical entry. I just shut the door behind her and leaned against the frame, watching to see what kind of performance she was about to deliver. She turned around with her eyes darting nervously, like she was trying to find her emotional footing or figure out what approach would be most effective. "This whole situation is completely insane, Tyler. You've made everything so much worse than it ever needed to be." I raised an eyebrow at her characterization. "Worse than cheating and lying about it for weeks? That's pretty impressive." She let out this exaggerated scoff, followed by one of those annoyed groans that had become her signature response to any request I made, no matter how reasonable. Then she said something that really crystallized the entire dynamic we had fallen into. "You've been so needy lately. What's your deal?" Her face twisted with frustration. "You knew we were struggling as a couple. I was trying to figure things out emotionally. You had been pushing me away for months before any of this happened." I let out a dry laugh. "So, your solution to relationship problems was sleeping with some random dude during a night out and then spinning elaborate stories to make me look like the cold, unavailable partner? You didn't even fight for our relationship," she accused. "I don't fight for people who have already surrendered. I replied calmly. That comment hit something deep, because she stepped closer to me like she was gearing up to either cry dramatically or start yelling. Maybe she was planning to do both. You've completely ruined everything in my life. I lost my program, my friends think I'm some kind of manipulative freak, and you just moved on like I didn't exist for the past year. It's funny how me giving you space to leave turns into manipulation once you don't get to control the narrative anymore, I observed. She blinked like this concept had genuinely never occurred to her before. I made one mistake, she snapped defensively. One. And I owned up to it when you confronted me. But you made it your personal mission to humiliate me and destroy my reputation. One mistake, I repeated slowly. Sleeping with someone behind my back wasn't your only mistake, Jessica. Lying about it repeatedly, telling people I was emotionally abusive, making up stories about how I held you back in life and stifled your personal growth. That's not one mistake. That's an entire resume of dishonest behavior. I actually laughed when she said that. And I don't mean nervously or sarcastically. I genuinely laughed because there was something almost funny about how completely blind she was to her own behavior and how she had been treating me. Here I was, asking her to participate in basic adult responsibilities related to our shared living space. And somehow that translated in her mind to me being needy. She flinched visibly at having her pattern of lies laid out so clearly. For a second, it looked like she might actually drop the victim act and acknowledge what she had really done. But instead, she doubled down on her defensive position. You're so bitter and vindictive. You've always been like this. Selfish, cold, emotionally unavailable, she said, trying to make this about my character flaws. You think being calm and collected makes you better than everyone else? I gave her a steady look. I think being calm kept me from dragging you through court for defamation and slander. But honestly, Jessica, you're absolutely disgusting. You think just because you have recordings and receipts that automatically makes you the victim in this situation? No, I said matter-of-factly. Having receipts makes me smart and prepared. You being here right now, begging and making threats, makes you look pathetic. Her mouth opened and then closed again, like she couldn't figure out what to say in response to such direct honesty. I walked past her and opened the front door again, making it clear that this conversation was over. We're done, Jessica. I mean completely, permanently done, I said firmly. This whole visit isn't getting you sympathy points, and it's definitely not getting you back into my life in any capacity. It's just making you look even worse than you already did. You'll regret treating me like this, she said quietly, trying to sound threatening. Not likely, I replied without any uncertainty. She stormed out of the apartment without another word, her heels clacking against the floor like a toddler trying to stomp the earth into submission. I shut the door behind her and immediately locked it, just in case she had any wild ideas about circling back for a second round of this confrontation. My deal, I realized in that moment, was that she had been treating me like an inconvenience for months while expecting me to handle all the practical aspects of our life together. And without missing a beat, she delivered the line that would ultimately seal the fate of our entire relationship. If you don't like it, find someone else. That night, Sophia brought over Thai food and we ended up crashing on the couch together, watching completely mindless shows on mute while laughing at the auto-generated captions that made no sense. No drama, no screaming matches, no emotional manipulation, just genuine peace and relaxation. A few days later, I heard through Dylan that Jessica had tried to guilt-trip Chloe into hosting some kind of girls' night so she could decompress and process everything that had happened. Chloe bailed on the plan at the last minute, claiming she had work obligations. The group chat that Jessica used to run and dominate was now completely silent. Nobody wanted to get involved with her emotional mess or be associated with the drama she had created. Not because of anything I had done or said since exposing the truth. I had been completely hands-off since releasing the recording, but because everyone in the friend group had watched her unravel publicly, and nobody wants to have a front-row seat to someone's self-inflicted breakdown. Jessica wasn't perceived as a villain in their eyes. That would have at least given her some kind of dramatic, interesting identity. She was something much worse. She was pathetic. She was the kind of person who had everything going for her, burned it all down for absolutely nothing meaningful, and then cried when the ashes didn't throw her a pity party. As for me, I didn't post about any of these developments on social media. I didn't rub any of it in anyone's face or gloat about the consequences she was experiencing. But I also didn't let any of her behavior go unpunished or unaddressed. Some people go nuclear when they're angry. They explode and destroy everything around them. I just quietly flipped the breaker and let Jessica sit in the darkness she had created for herself. She had lit the match that started this whole fire. I just made sure it had plenty of oxygen to keep burning. What had started as subtle, quiet disrespect slowly evolved into something much more problematic and hurtful. The casual dismissiveness became more frequent, the eye rolls more pronounced, and the general sense that my presence was an inconvenience rather than something she valued became impossible to ignore. Let's just say that when she finally told me to find someone else, she clearly didn't expect me to actually take her advice seriously. That was the moment when everything clicked into place for me. I didn't flinch, I didn't raise my voice, I didn't get defensive or try to argue with her logic. I just looked her directly in the eye and said, "Already did." Now, let me be completely clear about what I meant by that response. I wasn't talking about Sophia in a romantic context at all. We hadn't crossed any lines or developed feelings for each other. But I had found someone else to potentially live with. Someone who was respectful and mature and wouldn't treat basic conversation like a personal favor they were reluctantly granting me. Jessica blinked several times like her brain was struggling to process what I had just said. Finally, she managed to ask, "Wait, what?" I simply repeated, "You'll see," and walked into the bedroom, shutting the door firmly behind me. Then I pulled out my phone and sent Dylan a text message. "Sophia still need a place?" Within minutes, Dylan replied, "Yeah, she's been looking all week." I immediately followed up with, "Tell her I've got a room opening up." You see, the thing about Jessica was that she never actually thought any real consequences would result from her behavior. She would talk recklessly, roll her eyes at everything I said, and throw out lines like, "Find someone else," as if it was just some kind of mic drop moment where she got to have the last word. She expected me to nod along, continue paying my share of the rent, and keep my mouth shut about how poorly she was treating me. She genuinely believed I would never actually follow through on finding a better living situation. The joke was definitely on her because I absolutely was going to follow through. The difference was, I wasn't the one who was going to be leaving this apartment. She was. The next morning, I went through my usual routine of making coffee and sat down at the kitchen table, casually scrolling through online listings for desk chairs. I wasn't trying to be dramatic or make some grand statement. I just genuinely wanted a more comfortable workspace now that I knew peace and quiet were finally coming to my living situation. Jessica emerged from the bedroom wearing that same old hoodie she never seemed to wash, her face buried in her phone as usual. She walked straight past me like I was completely invisible, which had become her standard operating procedure. I decided it was time to address the elephant in the room, so I said, "We need to talk." She didn't bother looking up from whatever was captivating her attention on her screen. Just kept scrolling and replied dismissively, "About what?" "About you moving out," I said matter-of-factly. She probably thought I would just roll over and accept whatever treatment she decided to dish out, like I had been doing for months. Instead, I decided to flip the script entirely, quietly, methodically, and with plenty of documented evidence to back up every move I made. And honestly, that was just the beginning of how this whole situation unfolded. She let out this short, fake laugh that was clearly meant to show how ridiculous she thought I was being. "You're not serious." "I am completely serious," I replied. "I gave you plenty of time to fix things between us. You chose not to. I'm not going to sit around in limbo waiting for you to remember how to treat someone with basic respect. This relationship is done. We're done." Finally, she looked up from her phone. "Wait, what?" I continued calmly. "You were never actually on the lease, but I'm still giving you the full 2 weeks' notice to find somewhere else to go. I'm not like you. I don't just flip a switch and expect people to figure things out on their own." She blinked like her brain had completely stalled for a second, then said, "You're actually kicking me out?" "I'm ending something that's already dead," I explained. "I'm just not pretending otherwise anymore." She stood up and walked over to the counter where I had left some paperwork, picking it up like she thought it might be some kind of elaborate prank. Her hands were visibly shaking a little as she read through the documents. "You're really replacing me with some girl?" she snapped. I looked her straight in the eye and said, "I'm not replacing anything. I'm removing what shouldn't be here anymore." Her voice got sharp and defensive. "Who is it?" "Sophia." "My name is Tyler, I'm 26 years old, and I work as a marketing coordinator at a decent company. I like to think I maintain a relatively drama-free existence, at least when it comes to the kind of chaos I personally create. I've always been pretty good at recognizing when someone is taking me for granted, though I'll admit it took me much longer than I'd care to acknowledge to fully see what was happening in this particular situation." "Sophia who?" "Dylan's friend from the barbecue." She looked like she had just swallowed a piece of glass. "That girl? You're serious?" "She needed a place to live. I had one opening up. That's how adults handle practical situations," I explained calmly. "You're doing this to hurt me," she hissed accusingly. I shook my head. No, I'm doing this to stop sabotaging myself by staying in a situation that's clearly not working for either of us. She just stood there blinking hard, like she was trying to hold back some kind of emotional breakdown. I didn't flinch, I didn't try to comfort her, and I didn't get drawn into an argument. I simply walked into the living room and turned on the TV, making it clear that the conversation was over. Later that evening, I sent Sophia a text message letting her know that the lease switch had been approved by the landlord and that the 2-week notice had been officially delivered to Jessica. She replied within 5 minutes. Cool. I'll bring my first load next Wednesday and stash it in the closet till move-in day. The response was simple, straightforward, and completely free of drama or emotional landmines. It was genuinely weird how clean and mature that entire interaction felt compared to what I had been dealing with for months. The next night was undeniably tense, but not in the way Jessica had probably expected it to be. She tried to deploy the silent treatment strategy, likely hoping I would panic and come crawling back to apologize and beg her to stay. She slammed doors with unnecessary force, pouted around the apartment like a sulking teenager, and sent what I can only assume were pity-seeking texts to our mutual friends trying to gather sympathy for her situation. To be completely fair, our relationship didn't start out this way at all. When we first got together, things were actually really good. Like genuinely, authentically good in a way that felt natural and effortless. She even attempted some fake crying in the kitchen, complete with dramatic sniffling. Like this was some romantic movie where the female lead has a beautiful breakdown that magically fixes everything. The whole performance felt forced and manipulative, clearly designed to make me feel guilty about my decision. All I said to her during this entire theatrical display was, "You chose this the day you gave up on us." She didn't respond to that, and honestly, she didn't need to. We both knew deep down that our relationship had been over for months. I was just the first one willing to admit it out loud. By the time that first Wednesday rolled around, Sophia pulled up in her Honda Civic right on schedule, exactly when she said she would. She didn't bring a massive moving crew or create some kind of dramatic scene that would draw attention from the neighbors. She simply showed up with 3 plastic storage bins, a couple of hangers, and 1 small houseplant. She knocked once on the door, smiled when I opened it, and said, "Hope I'm not too early." "You're right on time," I replied, and meant it. Jessica was positioned on the couch, pretending to be completely absorbed in whatever was on her phone screen, acting like Sophia didn't exist or wasn't currently walking through our living room. I refused to feed into this passive-aggressive nonsense, so I didn't acknowledge Jessica's dramatic display at all. Sophia walked past Jessica like she was completely invisible, heading straight toward the spare room that would become her new living space. No unnecessary drama, no forced small talk, or attempts to win over someone who clearly wasn't interested in being civil. She just got to work organizing her belongings and settling in. After about 20 minutes of this perfectly normal moving activity, Jessica finally snapped and couldn't contain herself any longer. "So this is her?" she said loudly, clearly trying to start some kind of confrontation. I didn't even bother looking up from my laptop. "Yep. You're really doing this while I'm still here?" she demanded, her voice getting more agitated. "She's not bothering anyone. She's just dropping off some boxes and getting organized," I replied calmly. She used to genuinely laugh at my jokes, not the polite kind of laughter you give someone when you're trying to be nice, but real, authentic amusement. She was always down to go anywhere I suggested, whether it was checking out a new restaurant, catching a movie, or just wandering around the city without any particular destination in mind. When we talked, she engaged with me like I was someone she actually enjoyed being around, someone whose thoughts and opinions she valued and wanted to hear. "This is disgusting, Tyler," Jessica declared, like she was some kind of moral authority on appropriate behavior. "No," I said, finally looking directly at her. "Disrespecting someone for months, then acting shocked and offended when they decide they're done with that treatment. That's disgusting." Jessica stared at me like she couldn't believe I wasn't flinching or getting drawn into the emotional drama she was trying to create. She muttered under her breath, "You're just trying to make me jealous." I finally looked at her properly and said, "No, that would only work if I still cared about your feelings." She stormed off into the bedroom in a huff, probably to call someone and complain about how horrible and unfair I was being. Sophia glanced over at me, smirked a little at the whole ridiculous situation, and just kept unpacking her things like nothing unusual had happened. After Jessica left the apartment that evening, probably heading to her friend Chloe's place to get sympathy and validation, I was walking past the hallway when I heard Sophia comment, "Well, that went smoother than I thought it would." I couldn't help but grin at her observation. "We're only halfway through this process. She laughed like she already understood exactly what she had signed up for by agreeing to this living arrangement. So Jessica had exactly 2 weeks to gather all of her belongings and find somewhere else to live. She spent the first 5 days acting like she was still in charge of the apartment and our living situation. She walked around like she owned the walls, slamming cabinet doors with unnecessary force like I was supposed to flinch and realize the error of my ways. I didn't react to any of it. We would mess around together at Target, turning mundane shopping trips into little adventures where we'd send each other ridiculous memes we found on our phones and laugh about the weird products we discovered in random aisles. We could watch entire TV series together without it turning into some bizarre territorial dispute about who controlled the remote or what we were going to watch next. The whole dynamic felt easy and comfortable, like we were genuinely on the same team working toward the same goals. She attempted a few different soft approaches at first, using tactics she probably thought would be effective in winning me back. One evening, she ordered takeout and deliberately left an extra container on the counter with my name written on it, like this small gesture of thoughtfulness would somehow erase months of dismissive behavior. I didn't touch the food. I threw it directly in the trash bin without even opening it. Another night, she folded one of my sweatshirts that had been lying on the couch and carefully placed it on my bed, as if we were still playing house and she was contributing to our domestic partnership in some meaningful way. I didn't react to that either. I didn't even acknowledge that it had happened. That kind of complete silence and indifference drives people like Jessica absolutely insane, because they're used to getting emotional reactions out of the people around them. It's especially effective with Jessica specifically, because now she was starting to feel genuinely threatened by Sophia's presence and the reality that I was moving on without her. On day 6 of this 2-week period, the text messages started coming in, but not from Jessica directly. Instead, they came from her friend Chloe, who had clearly been recruited to fight Jessica's battles for her. Chloe texted me, "Hey, Jessica told me you're kicking her out for no reason." I replied, "No, she gave me the reason herself. I just followed through on what she suggested." Chloe tried again. "She's having a really hard time with all of this. Do you really think it's okay to humiliate someone like this?" My response was simple. "Tell her to pack faster." That was the last message I sent in that conversation, and apparently Chloe didn't push the issue any further. I wouldn't go so far as to say our relationship was absolutely perfect. No relationship ever really is. But it definitely felt effortless in a way that made me believe we had something solid. It felt like she was genuinely on my side, like we were partners who could handle whatever life threw at us because we had each other's backs. Jessica must have realized that Chloe wasn't getting anywhere with her intervention attempts because the next morning she decided to try a completely new approach. She waited until I was heading out the door for work and suddenly positioned herself in the hallway, physically blocking my path. "Can we talk?" she asked, crossing her arms and trying to sound calm and reasonable. I stopped walking and looked at her. "About what?" She took a step back, and her whole demeanor seemed almost rehearsed, like she had practiced this conversation in the mirror. "I don't want to fight with you. I just feel like everything is happening way too fast," she continued. "I understand that you're angry with me, but don't you think kicking me out over one fight is a little extreme?" I tilted my head and actually laughed at her characterization of our situation. "You think this is only about one fight? You called our entire relationship lame. You mocked everything I did. You told me to find someone else," I said, listing out her behavior matter-of-factly. "The problem is, you didn't think I would actually take that suggestion seriously." She looked at me like I was the one being unreasonable. "It was just a figure of speech, Tyler." I stepped around her and opened the front door. So as I'm done, when I returned home that evening, the entire mood in the apartment had shifted dramatically. She had lit a candle somewhere, so the whole place smelled like vanilla or some other artificially sweet scent, and music was playing softly from her phone. I walked through the door, dropped my bag in its usual spot, and didn't say a single word.